The thing that freaks me out about ghosts is that it's been a reoccurring theme throughout human history.
Greetings to the 25.3 thousand Grimdark enjoyers of my channel, and a friendly hello to the 67% who haven't subscribed. This time the focus turns to the alien swarm from beyond our galaxy. A Tyranid splinter fleet with an insidious bend, and a hunger for psychers. And rather uniquely, it's a list build for my very own Hive Fleet. It's a thematic list build for Hive Fleet Gengar. Now typically, thematic list build videos start by reviewing the faction rules, but since one of my more recent videos on the channel is my analysis on the Tyranid's army rules, specifically how poor they are, you know where to look if you want the deep dive breakdown. For this video, I'll keep it brief and just say the Tyranid's army rule is bottom tier. On both fronts, Shadow in the Warp and Synapse have some of the steepest requirements and limitations of any army rule out there, and it's for a pretty mild benefit in most cases, and a helpful benefit should the stars align and the right units become battle-shocked. When it comes to which detachment best exemplifies Hive Fleet Gengar, I prefer Synaptic Nexus, though Vanguard Onslaught isn't a bad choice either, as it does lean heavy into lictors and deceptive tricksy plays. So then, why Synaptic Nexus? Well, it's not because of the army rule. Synaptic Nexus's army rule, Synaptic Imperatives, reeks of uncertain design sentiments, which are the hallmark of an early codex. What should we do for the detachment which is supposed to flex supreme synaptic connection? The detachment which is most evocative of Leviathan, the star heel of 10th edition, and the namesake of the launch box. Surely it will be amazing. Well, we'll copy Gladius Task Force's Combat Doctrine's structure, but instead of giving it useful perks, we'll just make them lame. My pokes aside, while an army-wide invulnerable save is mechanically good, I dislike it on a personal level because invulnerable saves are an unsatisfying mechanic in my eyes. But even still, as mechanically good as army-wide invulnerable saves are, it requires the presence of synapse creatures, which feels lame when Gladius Task Force can just give out blanket perks army-wide, which are overall just better without such restrictions. I mean, look at this. +1 to advance and charge, whereas Gladius Task Force instead gives army-wide advance and charge, without the need for you to be in a restrictive range via synapse. I think the comparison speaks for itself. The synaptic imperative options are just poor. Thankfully, the back-end tools are much better off. Most are serviceable, and a few are great. One is a waste of space and an exemplar of terrible design sensibilities. And then we come to Smothering Shadow, which, if I'm being honest, is the whole reason I prefer this detachment. And it's because it's the spiritual successor to the stratagem I adored most from the previous codices, Hive Fleet Kronos' Deepest Shadow. Which is just so cool. Such an insidious ploy. For context, this stratagem was paired with a warlord trait which forced failed psychic tests nearby to deal mortal wounds to the psyker. When your opponent was aware that these tools are at your disposal, as you set up units in the movement phase, it creates a sort of unavoidable dread, because they knew if they attempted a psychic test, you could essentially force the fail and deal a consequence. Chef's Kiss. Now in 10th edition, it's a stratagem to essentially do grenades when an enemy unit fails battle shock, which sure sounds like a lot of hoops comparatively, but the roll required is easier than your standard grenades. And there's an important bit of context to it, and I'm sure the NID players out there will agree with me on this. But after the doo-doo army rules, the next most major gimp for the Tyranids is having no access to the grenades or tank shock core stratagems. All other armies having such easy means to dole out mortal wounds is a glaring luxury, one which the Tyranids are painfully unable to access. So, I'll take conditional psychic grenades over no grenades. Plus, it's on theme for Hive Fleet Gengar's desire to be spooky. Speaking of which, for this one the list goals are as follows. Psychic Dominion. Everybody knows ghost types are good against psychic types, and so for Hive Fleet Gengar, I've aimed to build a list which aims for psychic dominance. So lots of brain bugs. And ghastly haunters, referring to flexing units which add that sinister edge, in particular, those which like to sneak around and feed on brains. And with all that said, let's head over to the list breakdown. Let's begin with the creepy vanguard organisms of the list, starting with 2 units of 3 Leapers. I like Leapers a lot. Defensively, they aren't too shabby by Tyranid infantry standards, and offensively, 6 attacks per base, with fights first, isn't bad. It pairs well with their ability, which grants excessive use of heroic intervention, which makes them great for counterpunch ambushes. And I like to have them do just that with 2 Neurolictors. Neurolictors are a useful utility piece, as nearby enemies which are battle-shocked suffer a -1 to hit on their attacks, and your attacks against them are +1 to wound. This potent buff/debuff is likely to a fault in all honesty if we look at the codex as a whole. But in any case, they are useful as lone operative side questers at the very least. Because of this, enemies usually want to jump on them with their own forward operatives, which is why the Leaper's free heroic intervention and fights first pairs so well. And the last of the Lictor organisms is a Lictor. This custom Lictor conversion for Hive Fleet Gengar would probably be better served proxying for Death Leaper, in all honesty, so perhaps I should consider expanding the base size a bit. Regardless, unfortunately the Lictor is more useful for performing side quests than he is at being a terrifying melee assassin. But the Lictor's free rapid ingress ability, combined with fights first, makes him an excellent counterpunch when combined with heroic intervention, depending on the target. It doesn't happen often, but it's probably one of the best tactical maneuvers available based on the game mechanics of 10th edition, and it's certainly one of the most satisfying when it comes together. Next, we're moving on to some of the weaker bugs, starting with a single unit of 10 Hormagaunts. Hormagaunts are fast with their 10-inch movement and their advance and charge ability, and so they are great at moving around, and from a match play perspective, they are very useful for a turn 1 area denial. Offensively, their poor weapon skill really reins in their lethality, and so I would never recommend sticking them on anything tougher than Guardsmen. The exception to that is if you're using them to soak Overwatch, or keep a tough unit bogged down. On the smaller side, we got a single unit of Ripper Swarms. What's there to say? I usually keep the single base in reserves, and deep strike it in, either to screen out enemy deep strike, or for secondary side quests like Engage on All Fronts. After that, we have one Parasite of Mortrex. I've given this one Psychostatic Disruption, mostly for points purposes. Despite not having anything to do with Psychers or Brains, the Parasite is sort of an auto-include for Hive Fleet Gengar, as I found it to be an excellent tool for backline fodder harassment. Specifically, its small footprint and lone operative status, combined with rapid ingress, does instill fear in the unit of Guardsmen or Guardians which were hoping to lock down their backfield. Especially so when a unit of Rippers is spawned as a result of its parasitic infection ability. Also, I'll point out that as a Synapse unit, and the Parasite's ability to force a Battle Shock test in the fight phase makes it an excellent vector for the Smothering Shadow stratagem. Next we have 2 Psychophages. Thematically, I really like Psychophages. They sell the ravenous consumption theme of the Tyranids, but uniquely, they like to eat Psychers, which is a perfect fit. These ghastly medium-sized monsters got a datasheet overhaul a few months ago, reframing them much more as an aggro unit rather than a defensive buffing one, which is probably the right way to characterize them. Following that, what Tyranid's army would be complete without a Distraction Carnifex? While the Screamer Killer is not especially thematic for Hive Fleet Gengar, it does serve as another Battle Shock vector, this time in the shooting phase. So, should any Synapse units be around, the Screamer Killer can set off the Smothering Shadow stratagem. Which brings us to the Brain Bugs proper, starting with 2 units of 11 Neurogaunts. These guys aren't particularly good at much else other than hanging out in your home and screening out deep strike or high aggro turn 1 charges. They are cute little buggers though. However, they do feel like wasted design space. GW initially positioned these guys as the preeminent bodyguard unit for the Neuro Tyrant, but failed to provide rules to incentivize that pairing. Personally, I like the idea of them expanding the range of psychic abilities and attacks, sort of like the synaptic links from 9th edition. If they offered that kind of utility, they would not only be more useful, but I think it characterizes them far better, as they do look like a specially evolved type of organism. Next is the warlord of this list, a Neurotyrant with the Power of the Hive Mind enhancement, leading a unit of 6 Zoanthropes. This unit's role is to stage in the middle, so that the Tyrant is alive for when Shadow in the Warp is popped, and so that the relatively low range of the Tyrant's Psychic Flamer and the Zoanthrope's Psychic Last Cannons don't find themselves out of range. It's especially important because the Flamer's 2 damage and relatively high volume make it an excellent Overwatch area denying tool, but also, Zoanthropes and the Neurotyrant aren't that fast, so you really feel the difference of those shorter ranges. This is followed up by 3 more Zoanthropes. I usually keep this squad as one of my last drops in deployment, usually placing them on a flank that either wants more synapse, or where I suspect I'll need more psychic last cannons. After this, we have more brain bugs, even bigger this time. 2 Maliceptors. Maliceptors are very cool, but I didn't like GW's design, as I like my brain bugs to be floating. You can see how I built these on my floating Maliceptors video. In any case, the Maliceptor is a surprisingly tanky debuffer unit. Offensively, its melee is a little underwhelming, as Tyranids tend to be overall, and on the ranged side, while it does share the much desired Strength 10 AP2 Damage 3 profile, like with the Blight Launcher Bloat Drones or Dark Reapers, it isn't as easily leveraged due to an overall lower movement speed and shorter range. Despite that, the Diffusion Aura can skew enemy potency drastically if you can force those breakpoints, and so I find their best use is to lurch forward and gum up and debuff enemy lines. Unfortunately, the Maliceptor doesn't have the speed required for it, so really it's a sort of do your best little buddy type of scenario. And the last unit of this list, the unit nobody could have predicted, is a Norn Emissary. What you see here is my latest conversion for Hive Fleet Gengar. The thing about top-level leader-type units, captains, autarchs, chaos lords, etc., is that I feel they ought to be able to take whatever gear they want. In the case of Tyranids, I think that blows open the doors with regards to creativity. So here is Hive Fleet Gengar's custom Norn, the Norn Phantom, which ideally would use a custom datasheet in narrative games, but in this list is counting as a Norn Emissary. When this video gets published, I should have the build video live, so you can check it out if you're interested. The Norn Emissary, as a unit, is fine. I don't think it's aged well due to codex creep. Such is the fate of having the first codex with GW's terrible rules management, but it is what it is. The Norn is here to use its singular purpose to claim and bully an objective, shoving its 16 wounds behind a toughness 11, a 2-up armor save, 4-up invulnerable save, and a 5-up feel no pain. And wouldn't you know it, at an even 2,000 points, that's the list. My grievances with the NID's 10th edition rules aside, this list marks a hobby goal of mine completed. I can't help but feel there's something special about it. Coming up with your own homebrew subfaction, establishing its themes, and building out the army to that theme, with the inherent weaknesses and strength that come with that aim. To me, it feels like the real core of the hobby. And it allows this thematic list build video to also double as a neat showcase for Hive Fleet Gengar at the same time, which feels like a win. I guess if I were to change anything, I'd consider dropping the Parasite's enhancement and popping my custom Lictor on a 60mm base to count as Death Leaper. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Well, that's a wrap on this one. If you enjoyed this video, there are buttons for liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thanks for watching, and a special thanks to Julius Maximus, as well as my other generous patrons and channel members. Channel members and patrons get early access to videos, as well as free access to these STL doodads. Just a little something for those who help keep the dream alive. Anyways, thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.